My name is Walter Milton. I'm 81 years old. I live in a modest brick house on the east edge of Colorado Springs, a home my late wife and I bought when we were still young, still hopeful, still full of plans. For 47 years, this house heard the sounds of children running through the hallways, the clatter of Sunday breakfast, the whispers of late-night talks between two people who built a life from nothing but mutual respect and loyalty. Now, it's mostly quiet. The silence inside these walls is not peaceful but thick, heavy like a woolen blanket in summer. I speak out loud sometimes just to hear a voice. Since my wife Miriam passed 5 years ago, suddenly from a heart attack, time has shifted in strange ways. The days blur together. Mornings start with the creaking of my knees and the shrill whistle of the kettle. I still make breakfast the way she liked it. Over-easy eggs, black coffee, one slice of toast, buttered while hot. I do it out of habit, not appetite. Most of it ends up in the trash. The rituals remain because they remind me I'm still tethered to something real, something human. I'm not completely alone, not in the strictest sense. I have 2 children, Eric, my son, who's 49 and works in tech out of Boulder, and my daughter Karen, 52, who stayed closer to home but rarely stops by unless there's a reason. They both have families of their own. Mortgages, aging cars, vacations to save for, therapy sessions to schedule for their teenagers. I get it. Life is expensive. Still, there's a particular sting to the way the phone never rings unless it's my dentist or the pharmacy reminding me to refill my prescriptions. I leave voicemails for them sometimes, just simple ones. Hey, it's Dad. Hope everything's okay. Usually I hear back a week later, if at all. My world has become narrow. I go for walks in the neighborhood, slow, deliberate strolls with my cane tapping rhythmically on the sidewalk. The cashier at the corner store knows me by name. Her name's Julia, and she always puts my milk in double bags. The other day, she asked if I had plans for Thanksgiving, and I told her, half joking, "Yes, I'll be dining with my microwave." She laughed in that polite way young people do when they don't know what else to say to someone who looks like they've seen too much life. People assume I must be lonely. Sometimes I am. But more often I'm just untethered. Not sad, not bitter, just disconnected from the flow of things. I spent my afternoons rereading old books, going through Miriam's letters, organizing the garage, though there's nothing left to organize. I've become a creature of routine. Tuesday is laundry, Wednesday is bills, Thursday is vacuuming. The rhythm keeps me sane. It was about 6 months ago that I first started thinking about my estate again, not because anything felt urgent, but because I wanted to do it right. I'd had a basic will since the late 90s, but life changes. People change. Miriam and I had once talked about leaving equal parts to the kids, maybe setting aside something for the grandkids' college funds. But in the years since her passing, I started to see things differently. It's not that I don't love Eric and Karen. I do in that deep, immutable way parents do, but I've watched them become strangers in front of me. People I don't fully recognize. They don't need my money. What they need is a reminder that nothing is guaranteed, least of all inheritance. What really lit the fire under me, though, was an offhand comment Karen made during a rare lunch visit. She was fiddling with her phone while I poured coffee, and I mentioned I'd seen a lawyer the week before to ask about revising my will. Her head snapped up like I'd said something scandalous. "Are you sure that's necessary, Dad? I mean, at your age, no offense, but you do forget things sometimes." I didn't answer her right away. I just looked at her, at the way she stared at me like I was a fragile package she hadn't ordered but didn't want to throw out either. That look stuck with me long after she left. I'd forgotten to take the trash out that week, yes. I'd left the oven on once last month. That doesn't make me crazy. That makes me 81. Still, the seed was planted. I started noticing things. Conversations with Eric turned cautious, like he was choosing his words carefully, keeping track of what I did or didn't recall. Karen began stopping by more often. Not with food or company, but with questions. Where did I keep my bank statements? Had I thought about giving someone else access to my online accounts just in case? She even suggested consolidating my finances, which she offered to help with, so it doesn't get too overwhelming for you. At first, I chalked it up to concern. Maybe it was. But then came the stories. Neighbors mentioning things Karen had said at book club, snippets of gossip that didn't feel accidental, that I'd been declining, that I'd started talking to myself, that I forgot what year it was last Christmas. Lies, all of them. Clever, quiet lies. The worst came when I called the bank to ask about updating my beneficiary forms. The manager, a young man named Owen, sounded hesitant. "Mr. Milton," he said, "I just want to confirm. Are you currently under any kind of guardianship or financial conservatorship?" I almost dropped the phone. "No," I told him. "Absolutely not." He apologized profusely, said it was probably a system error. But I knew better. Someone had started a process. Someone wanted control. I sat in my recliner that night with a cup of lukewarm tea, staring out the window into the dusk. The mountains in the distance were capped with snow. A fox wandered across the backyard like it owned the place. I thought about Miriam and how she used to say, "Families are either your greatest support or your greatest sorrow." Back then, I thought she meant her own parents. But maybe she was warning me. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, pulled out the manila folder labeled Final Affairs. I lit the desk lamp, and for the first time in a long time, I started making new plans. Quietly, carefully, because now I knew the truth. My children were waiting for me to fall. They were preparing for it, maybe even hoping for it. But I wasn't going anywhere just yet, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them write the ending of my story. I remember the day I decided to revise my estate plan with crystal clarity, not because it was extraordinary in any grand sense, but because it was so profoundly ordinary. One of those calm days that quietly reshapes the course of a life without fanfare. It was a Wednesday, and the sky outside my kitchen window was filled with lazy gray clouds, the kind that threatened rain but never quite delivered. I had made myself a modest breakfast, black coffee and a bowl of oatmeal with a sprinkle of cinnamon, and I was halfway through my second cup when I glanced at the stack of unopened mail by the fruit bowl. Most of it was junk. Coupons for oil changes, catalogs from companies I hadn't bought from in years, some Medicare pamphlet with smiling people on the cover, all too young to know what real aging feels like. But in the middle of the stack was a letter from the law office I had worked with decades ago, the same office that helped draft my original will when Miriam and I first bought the house. Something about seeing that familiar envelope, crisp, professional, with my name typed neatly across the front, stirred something inside me, not alarm exactly, but a quiet recognition that I had been postponing decisions I should have made long ago. I called the office that afternoon. A new associate answered, someone named Hannah. She had the brisk, efficient tone of a person who had too many tasks and not enough time, but she was polite enough. "Mr. Milton," she said. "Of course we can set up a review. Do you still reside at the Colorado Springs address?" I confirmed, and we scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. I hung up and stared at the phone for a while, unsure why my hand was trembling slightly. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the first real move I had made in years that was purely for myself. Over the next few days, I dug through old folders and safety deposit slips, updating account numbers, making a list of everything I still owned. It was more than I thought. The house, fully paid off, 3 bank accounts, an old but healthy IRA, 2 vintage bonds from the 80s that Miriam had insisted we keep for emergencies. I had no debts, no loans, no car payment. I was, by all definitions, financially free. But the more I documented, the more I realized how vulnerable I truly was. Because all of it, All those assets and records were exposed to interpretation if I wasn't clear, and clarity was something age did not always allow us the luxury of keeping indefinitely. I couldn't rely on assumptions anymore. I couldn't assume my children would honor my intentions if I didn't spell them out in language so ironclad even a team of lawyers would find no room for manipulation. When Monday came, I dressed carefully in slacks and the navy sweater Miriam had once said made my eyes look less tired. I took a cab to the office. My driving had become unreliable, and I didn't want to risk forgetting where I parked. The building was newer, glass and steel, cold in a way that suggested ambition more than hospitality. Hannah met me in the lobby. She couldn't have been older than 30, her heels too high for comfort and her smile too rehearsed. But she offered me coffee and led me to a private conference room with tall windows and a view of the highway. We spent nearly 2 hours going through everything. I told her I wanted to revise the will, to establish a living trust, to ensure that if anything happened to me, I wouldn't be funneled into some nursing home by a committee of relatives claiming to act in my best interest. She nodded professionally and took notes, but I could sense her discomfort growing with every clause I requested, especially the one about appointing a non-family trustee. It's unusual, she said, but not unheard of. I said nothing. Unusual or not, it was necessary. By the time I returned home, I felt lighter, like I had finally locked the door to a room where danger had been waiting, breathing quietly in the dark. But that sense of relief didn't last. It was only a few days later that the whispers started, not from strangers but from the very people who should have been by my side. Karen came by unannounced one afternoon, a rare and jarring event in itself. She brought banana bread, still warm in foil, and wore that expression, part concern, part calculation, that I had come to recognize too well. "Dad," she said, "Eric told me you were making some legal changes." "About the will?" I nodded cautiously. "Just updating a few things," I said, but her brow furrowed and she sat down across from me like she was preparing for an interrogation. "I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly about all this," she began, her tone soft but insistent. "I mean, these things can be confusing, and sometimes people take advantage of the elderly." I laughed, not with humor but with disbelief. "Who's taking advantage of me, Karen?" I asked. She blinked, surprised. "No one. I'm just saying. Maybe we should be involved in the process. Maybe we should come with you next time, to make sure everything's, fair." Fair. The word landed like a stone in my chest. I looked at her face and suddenly saw not my daughter, but a woman rehearsing a legal position. Her eyes didn't blink in sympathy. They were scanning, assessing. I excused myself to the kitchen and stood by the sink for a full minute, just breathing. The next day, I got a call from my neighbor, Jeff, a retired postal worker who sometimes mowed his lawn at the same time I did. He was casual at first, making small talk about the weather, but then his voice dropped. "Hey, Walter, listen, I don't mean to intrude, but I heard something strange at the grocery store. Your son was talking to the pharmacist, said you'd been acting erratic, something about forgetting where you were a few times." I felt my jaw tighten. I had never done any such thing. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He hesitated. If you ever need someone to vouch for you, for your clarity, I'd be happy to. We all forget things, but I've never once thought you were confused." It escalated quickly after that. A letter arrived from an attorney, my son's attorney, formally suggesting a conservatorship be established in light of Mr. Milton's declining mental faculties. I sat in my recliner with the envelope trembling in my hands. Declining? I had passed my last medical exam with flying colors. My blood pressure was better than most people 20 years younger. I did my taxes manually. And yet, here it was in black and white, a legal attempt to take over my autonomy. The betrayal was stunning in its efficiency. It wasn't a physical attack, but it felt violent all the same. My children were positioning me as a burden, a risk, a liability they needed to manage. Not because I had given them reason to believe I was failing, but because I had dared to regain control. And that was when I understood. They weren't concerned about my health. They were concerned about my choices. The more I made decisions on my own, the more dangerous I became to whatever plans they had for my estate. My independence was not an asset in their eyes. It was an obstacle. I went to the mirror in the bathroom and looked at myself for a long time. The man staring back was old, yes, but he was not confused. He was not lost. He was not finished. I straightened my shoulders, walked back to my desk, and picked up the phone. It was time to call a different kind of lawyer. The war had begun. The first time I realized just how far Eric and Karen were willing to go was a cold Friday morning in late February. The kind of day where the sky hovers low and gray, as if pressing down on your thoughts. I had gone to the front yard to refill the bird feeder, something I did religiously every week since Miriam passed. She had adored birds, especially finches and robins, and I found a strange comfort in watching them flutter in and out of the tree by the porch, as if she were still speaking to me through their wings. I was wearing my old overcoat, the one with the ripped lining I kept meaning to fix, and my hands were numb with cold as I struggled with the latch on the seed container. As I turned to go back inside, I saw Karen's car pull up. She didn't call beforehand, as she usually did. She stepped out with a folder tucked under one arm and a bright, artificial smile that reminded me of a nurse trying to coax an agitated patient back into bed. She hugged me, too tightly, and followed me inside without waiting to be invited. I offered her coffee, which she declined, opting instead to sit stiffly at the dining table like she was about to deliver a formal speech. "Dad," she began, "Eric and I have been talking. We're worried about you. You've been isolated. You don't answer calls right away. Last week you called me twice in the same day and asked the same question." I blinked. "What question?" She hesitated, clearly not expecting to be challenged. "You asked if I'd picked up your prescription, but you never asked me to pick anything up." I stared at her, trying to remember. Maybe I had called. Maybe I had been thinking of someone else, like Julia from the pharmacy, and dialed Karen by accident. But even if that were true, a single mistaken call did not warrant the level of scrutiny she was applying. "That doesn't mean anything," I said. "People forget things. I'm not losing my mind." She nodded, a little too quickly. "Of course not. No one's saying that. But we thought," and here she reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of papers, "it might be a good idea to have some legal protections in place, just in case." I didn't take the folder right away. I looked at her instead, really looked. Her makeup was a little heavier than usual. Her nails were bitten down, which meant she was nervous. She pushed the papers toward me, and I picked them up slowly, thumbing through them without absorbing the words. Somewhere on the third page I saw the phrase, "durable power of attorney," and my stomach dropped. "You want me to sign this?" I asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "It's standard, just a precaution. This way, if anything ever happens, if you get sick or can't make decisions, we can handle things for you. Pay your bills, talk to the doctors, make sure you're taken care of." Her voice was smooth, practiced, but her eyes gave her away. They weren't warm. They were calculating, measuring my reaction. I put the papers down and stood up. "Karen, if I ever need someone to make decisions for me, I'll let you know. But that day isn't today." She smiled, but it was a tight, pained smile, the kind that covers up fury. "Dad," she said, standing as well, "you're being paranoid. We're trying to help you." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You want control of my money, my house, my life. That's not help. That's strategy." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I want you to leave." Her jaw tightened. She gathered her papers and marched to the door, but just before stepping out she turned and said, "You'll regret this. We're only trying to protect you." I closed the door behind her and locked it. Not out of fear, but out of a dawning clarity that everything had changed. The following week, I started noticing a shift in how the world around me treated me. My neighbor, Mrs. Hammond, who used to chat with me every Tuesday about her rose garden, suddenly spoke with a strange hesitance, as if worried I might forget where I was in the middle of a sentence. The clerk at the bank, one I'd known for years, asked me to confirm my identity twice before allowing a routine withdrawal. My primary physician, Dr. Lee, called to say he'd received a concerned inquiry from a family member and wanted me to come in for a cognitive screening. I declined politely but firmly. The whispers were spreading, and I hadn't even left the house. Then Eric came. Unannounced, like Karen, but worse in a way because he brought his oldest son, my grandson Logan, who I hadn't seen in over a year. Logan sat in the living room pretending to scroll through his phone while Eric paced, speaking in low, rehearsed tones. "Dad, we all want what's best for you," he said. "We've been looking into some options. Assisted living, for example. Places that aren't sterile like nursing homes. They have social activities, nice rooms, even a shuttle service. You'd still be independent, just safer." I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was so audacious. Safer from what? My couch? My toaster? Eric didn't laugh. From forgetting the stoves on, from falling down the stairs, from someone breaking in when you forget to lock the door. I leaned forward, my voice suddenly sharper than even I intended. "Did Karen tell you I forgot to lock the door? Because I didn't. You know what I do forget? I forget what it's like to have children who call because they care, and not because they're circling like vultures." That was the first time I saw something ugly flash across Eric's face. It wasn't rage, it was fear. The fear of a man who realizes the object of his manipulation might just be sharper than he thought. He didn't say anything else, just stood up, grabbed Logan by the shoulder, and left. That evening, I started locking my door even during the day. I no longer felt safe, not because of criminals or health scares, but because I realized my own family had stopped seeing me as a man and started seeing me as an estate. It was 2 days later that the second envelope arrived. This one from a new attorney, one I'd never heard of. Inside was a formal request for a psychological evaluation, citing concerns from multiple family members regarding Mr. E. Milton's cognitive decline. It was worded politely, but the intent was clear. They were building a case, a slow, creeping strategy of doubt, hoping to amass enough little concerns that someone in a robe would eventually decide I was no longer competent to handle my own affairs. I sat with that letter on my lap for hours, watching the light shift across the room as the afternoon faded into dusk. The birds outside had gone quiet. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear Miriam's voice. If they want a war, make sure they regret it. She'd never raised her voice, but when she said things like that, you listened. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up researching elder law. I called Hannah in the morning and asked her to expedite the formation of the trust. I contacted a private medical firm and scheduled an independent neurological evaluation. I reached out to a retired colleague from my school district days, Tom Watkins, a lawyer who now did estate defense cases part-time. I told him everything. He was quiet for a while, then said, "They're making a move. You better be ready to make one, too." And I was. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, and I wasn't going to let them take mine without a fight. I don't know if there's a specific moment when a man realizes his children no longer see him as a person, but as a liability. But for me, that realization came on a drizzling Tuesday afternoon in March, when I made the mistake of stopping by the county clerk's office to get a certified copy of my birth certificate. I needed it for the trust paperwork Hannah's team was finalizing, and I didn't think twice about doing it in person. It was a small errand, something I'd done countless times over the years. But this time, the clerk, an older man I vaguely recognized from city council meetings long ago, took an unusually long time verifying my ID. He squinted at my license, looked back at me, then lowered his voice and asked, "Do you have someone with you, Mr. Milton?" I blinked. Why would I? He hesitated. "Oh, nothing, just some people prefer to bring family when handling this sort of thing." I nodded slowly, thanked him for the certificate, and left the building in silence. But something about the way he looked at me lingered all the way home. That same patronizing caution I'd seen on Karen's face, on Eric's, on the pharmacist's, it was spreading. Later that evening, while sorting through some of Miriam's old records, I came across a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was from Thanksgiving, maybe 12 years ago. All of us were there, me, Miriam, Eric, Karen, their spouses, and the grandkids. We were sitting around the table, laughing. I was holding a carving knife, pretending to deliver a speech, and everyone was smiling, even Karen, who rarely smiled for pictures. I stared at that image for what felt like hours, trying to understand how we had gone from that moment to this abyss between us. What had changed? Had it always been there, hidden under politeness and habit? Or had I simply outlived my usefulness to them? The next day, I received a letter by certified mail. Inside was a formal petition, filed in court, requesting emergency conservatorship over my finances and healthcare decisions. The plaintiffs were Eric and Karen. The allegations were vague but loaded. Signs of cognitive deterioration, incidents of confusion, potential financial mismanagement, refusal to accept help from family. Attached were 2 affidavits, one from a neighbor I barely spoke to anymore, claiming I had asked her the same question twice in the same week, and one from Eric's friend, some internist from Denver, claiming he had concerns based on secondhand reports. There were no actual medical records, no diagnoses, just suggestion, repetition, and implication. I felt the room spin around me. This wasn't just talk anymore. This was action. My own children were taking me to court to declare me legally unfit. And for what? For checking my own mail, for asking questions, for choosing a different trustee than the one they had clearly expected to be named. My hands trembled as I folded the documents and placed them in a drawer. I could feel the tremor in my chest. Not fear exactly, but a kind of grief I hadn't felt since Miriam died. The betrayal was so intimate, so cruel in its calculation, that it drained something vital from me in that moment. But it didn't destroy me. Instead, it clarified everything. I called Tom Watkins the next morning and asked him to come over. He brought coffee, like he always did, and sat with me in the den while I laid everything out. "They're not just trying to control the money," I said. "They're trying to erase me from my own life." He didn't argue. He just listened, nodded, then pulled a thick legal pad from his briefcase and began making notes. "We'll need affidavits," he said. "Character witnesses, medical clearance, documentation of your financial independence." I nodded. I had already scheduled the cognitive evaluation, and I asked Julia from the pharmacy, Jeff from next door, and even Pastor Harold from the Methodist Church to write letters confirming my lucidity and independence. Each agreed without hesitation. I may not have been surrounded by family, but I wasn't alone. A week later, the medical report came back. Clear. No signs of dementia, no cognitive impairment, no psychiatric instability. I made 6 copies, notarized each one, and gave them to Tom. We filed a formal opposition to the conservatorship petition and included a motion to dismiss the entire request as baseless and malicious. Still, the court date was set. April 14th, the day everything would be laid bare. In the days leading up to the hearing, I stopped answering the phone when it rang. Karen left voice messages asking if I wanted to talk about this calmly before things got legal. Eric sent an email filled with feigned sadness saying he wished it hadn't come to this, but, Dad, you've left us no choice. I didn't respond. What was there to say? They had crossed a line. This was no longer a family issue. It was a matter of survival. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen under the soft hum of the refrigerator, reading through my own medical file, tracing the careful handwriting of Dr. Abrams, the neurologist who had conducted my evaluation. Fully lucid. High verbal intelligence. No observable memory deficits. I underlined those words with a pen and left the report on the kitchen table, like a battle standard. Let them try to ignore that. When morning came, I dressed with quiet precision. Gray slacks, polished shoes, a blue dress shirt Miriam once said brought out the dignity in my posture. Tom picked me up just before 9. As we drove to the courthouse, he glanced at me and said, "You ready?" I nodded, but in truth, I wasn't sure. I didn't know if anyone was ever ready to face their own children in court, but I knew I had no choice. I wasn't going to let them bury me while I was still breathing, and I wasn't going to let them win. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, a long, rectangular space with cheap blue carpet and fluorescent lights that made everyone look older and more tired than they were. I had never been there before, though I had driven past the county complex dozens of times over the years, never imagining that one day I would sit on the wrong side of the aisle, not as a witness, not as a juror, but as the subject of a petition that essentially declared me incapable of taking care of my own life. When Tom and I entered, Karen and Eric were already seated on the left, dressed in carefully curated neutrality. Karen in a beige pantsuit with no jewelry except her wedding band. Eric in a navy blazer he probably hadn't worn since his last performance review. Neither of them looked at me, though I saw Karen glance my way once with a flicker of something between guilt and resolve, a glance that was gone the second I met her eyes. Their lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s named Megan Riggs, was flipping through a binder thick with papers I could only assume were filled with distorted memories, second-hand anecdotes, and selective concerns from doctors who had never met me. Tom placed our file on the table with a kind of quiet defiance. He didn't speak much. He rarely did when it wasn't required, but there was something about the way he organized his papers, the way he kept one hand resting protectively over my documents, that made me feel less alone. When the judge entered, a woman named Dale Morris, calm-eyed and professional, we all stood. I focused on my breathing, on the rhythm of my heart, trying to ignore the bitterness rising in my throat as the proceeding began. The petition was read aloud, every word like a splinter under my skin. Subject has exhibited signs of memory loss, confusion, paranoia. Petitioners cite repeated incidents where the respondent allegedly misplaced bills, forgot appointments, and expressed suspicion toward family members' intentions. I clenched my jaw as the words echoed through the room, feeling not like a man. Defending his freedom, but like a criminal forced to prove his own sanity. Then came the witnesses. First, a woman I didn't recognize, apparently a social worker contacted by Karen after becoming concerned. She spoke vaguely of patterns, of risk factors, of elderly individuals who slowly lose their grip on reality without even realizing it. She had never spoken to me, never visited my home, never once asked me what I wanted or how I felt. And yet here she was, testifying to my state of mind based on a few conversations with my daughter and son. Next came Dr. Rakesh, the internist from Denver, who admitted under oath that he had never examined me directly but had written a letter of concern out of professional courtesy to Eric, who was visibly distraught over my behavior. He used phrases like potential neurocognitive decline and early-stage indicators, all framed carefully to avoid outright diagnosis but enough to plant seeds of doubt in the judge's mind. I wanted to shout, to ask how someone could diagnose a brain they had never even seen, but Tom rested a hand on my arm, firm and steady. Then it was our turn. Tom began by laying out a timeline. My clear medical record, my documented financial independence, the recent formation of a trust, the notarized letters from my neighbors and my pharmacist confirming my lucidity. He submitted the full report from Dr. Abrams, the neurologist who had performed a complete cognitive assessment 2 weeks prior and found no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any form of psychiatric disturbance. Then he brought in Pastor Harold, who testified that I had recently delivered a guest lecture at the senior center, recalling events from history with clarity and wit. Finally, Tom asked permission to play a short video. It was taken on my laptop 2 nights before the hearing, a simple recording of me reading a passage from Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, then speaking, clearly and unscripted, about what the novel had meant to Miriam and me when we read it during our courtship. I watched the video play on the screen, saw myself speaking plainly and calmly, without notes, quoting lines from memory, pausing to smile at a thought that had made me laugh. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morris looked at me directly. "Mr. Milton, would you like to make a statement?" I stood. My knees ached and my spine creaked, but my voice did not shake. "Your Honor," I said, "I may be 81 years old, but I am not lost. I may forget where I put my glasses or whether I took my vitamins this morning, but I do not forget who I am. I know my name. I know my history. I know the difference between someone helping me and someone trying to take what is mine. I spent my life serving others, as a teacher, as a principal, as a husband, and as a father. And now my children want to take away the last thing I have left, my dignity. Not because I'm incapable, but because I dared to make decisions without their permission. If that's what being old means in this country now, then we are in more trouble than I thought." I sat down. The judge thanked everyone and said she would issue a ruling within 7 days. As we exited the courtroom, Karen brushed past me without a word. Eric paused for a moment, opened his mouth, then closed it again and followed her. I stood in the parking lot staring at their retreating backs, wondering if there was anything left to salvage. But the next morning answered that question definitively. I received an alert from the bank. There had been an attempt to transfer $25,000 from one of my accounts to a new account in Eric's name. The request had been flagged and declined due to inconsistencies in authorization. I called the bank immediately, and they confirmed that someone had logged in using my online credentials I had only ever written down in a notebook stored in my desk at home. Someone had been in my house. I checked the back door. No signs of a break-in. But when I looked at the drawer where I kept the notebook, I saw that it had been neatly closed but slightly askew, not flush the way I always left it. I checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the study. Nothing was missing, nothing obvious, but I knew. Someone had come while I was out, found the notebook, taken what they needed, and left without a trace. It could only have been one of them. Maybe Karen still had a key. Maybe she had copied one years ago, back when visits were still warm and untainted. Or maybe Eric had picked the lock. It didn't matter how. It mattered that it happened. I changed every password. I closed the vulnerable accounts. I bought a new safe, installed new locks, and arranged for a neighbor's son to install a motion sensor camera above my front door. Then I called Tom and told him it was time to stop reacting and start moving forward. We filed a police report, not because I expected the authorities to do much, but because it created a record. Then we initiated a full financial audit and moved the bulk of my liquid assets into the trust, stripping my personal accounts of anything tempting. I made sure that even if someone managed to get in again, they would find nothing but dust and pension stubs. 3 days later, Judge Morris issued her ruling. The petition was denied. In her written decision, she cited lack of credible evidence, conflicting testimony, and a pattern of behavior from the petitioners that suggested ulterior motives. She ordered that no further legal actions be taken without direct medical evidence and that all previous affidavits be removed from my file. It was a complete and public vindication. The courthouse posted the ruling online, and I printed it out and framed it, placing it next to Miriam's picture on the mantel. Not out of vanity, but as a reminder that I had not imagined any of it, that I had stood my ground, and that I had won. But even victory left its bruises. The day after the ruling, Karen showed up at my door. She was alone, without her usual composure, wearing no makeup, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that revealed how tired she looked. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She asked if we could talk. I told her she had 2 minutes. She said they had panicked, that Eric had convinced her this was the only way to protect me, that things had spiraled. I said nothing. She asked if I would consider rebuilding trust. I told her I didn't even know who she was anymore. She cried, real tears, or what she thought were real, but I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, just distance. And then I closed the door, gently but firmly. That night, I sat alone on the porch and thought about what came next. I had been forced to defend my sanity, my freedom, and my very identity in a courtroom. My own children had tried to erase me from the decisions that shaped my future, and yet here I was, still standing, still lucid, still mine. But something inside me had shifted, and what came next wouldn't be about defense. It would be about control. My control. There's something liberating about losing the last illusion that your family will ever truly come back to you. It's not a joyful feeling, not a relief exactly, but more like the deep exhale of a man who has finally stopped knocking on a locked door. After the court's ruling, after the passwords were changed and the locks replaced and the trust secured beyond interference, I expected Karen and Eric to disappear, to shrink away from the battlefield they themselves had created. Instead, they adapted. They began a new campaign, less overt, more psychological. I received notes in the mail, unsigned but clearly from Karen, written in a gentle, almost infantilizing tone. We're sorry you felt we overstepped. We love you very much. Please don't isolate yourself. You need people around you at your age. And then a second note with similar language but less patience. It's not healthy to cut your children out. Don't let your pride rob you of the time we still have left. It would have been touching if it hadn't come weeks after trying to have me declared legally incompetent. I threw both letters in the fireplace without opening the third one that arrived, but I wasn't finished. Vindication alone wasn't enough. The trust protected my assets from external hands, yes, but my children still walk the streets of this city with the confidence that they had only made a mistake, not a betrayal. They still dined with friends and told their story in a different light. A concerned daughter, a dutiful son, a confused old man lashing out from paranoia. Their social circles likely nodded sympathetically, offered condolences for the strain of elder care, and shifted their pity in the wrong direction. I wasn't interested in revenge. Not in the dramatic sense. But I was interested in balance. I was interested in truth becoming visible, undeniable, etched in places they couldn't erase. It started with the house. 8 years ago, I had given Eric and Karen the down payment on their shared property. Karen had just finalized her divorce. Eric had been laid off temporarily, and they needed a fresh start for the grandkids, who were still in middle school back. Then, I gave them the money not as a gift, but as an investment. My name was on the title, and I retained a 1/3 ownership of the property, something they agreed to at the time and then promptly chose to forget. I hadn't stepped foot inside that house in nearly 5 years, and when I had asked about it after Miriam died, they told me it wasn't set up for guests and that I would be more comfortable in my own space. I believed them. I accepted their excuses. I sat in my quiet house and believed that somehow, someday, they would open that door to me again. But now, that property was no longer a symbol of reconciliation. It was leverage. I contacted a real estate attorney, a brisk, silver-haired woman named Judith Kane, who reviewed the deed and confirmed in clear, precise language that, yes, I was a legal co-owner of the property, with all the rights and privileges therein. "You can force a sale," she said plainly. "They'll fight it, but they'll lose. It's just a matter of time." I told her I didn't want to waste time. I wanted to start the process immediately. Within a week, a letter was sent to both Karen and Eric, notifying them of my intent to sell my share of the house, and, if necessary, to petition the court for full partition. I heard nothing for 5 days. Then the calls began. They didn't leave voicemails. They knew better than to leave evidence. But they called at all hours, early in the morning, late at night, during lunch, sometimes back to back. I didn't answer a single one. I sat by the window with the receiver off the hook, watching spring bloom across the yard, the dogwood tree in full flower, as if nothing inside the walls of this family had rotted. A week later, I received a letter from Eric's attorney, this one much less polished than the firm that had tried to take control of my affairs. It accused me of acting out of emotional retaliation, threatened counter-litigation, and implied that I would regret drawing public attention to a private matter. I took it to Judith, who read it without a flicker of concern. "Standard bluff," she said. "They've got nothing. We'll proceed." We filed the partition suit. The story, of course, leaked almost immediately. Not from me, but from them. Mutual acquaintances began calling me, politely asking if everything was okay, or suggesting I sit down with the kids and talk things out. But the best moment came 2 weeks into the process, when a reporter from a small local newsletter reached out to request a quote. Apparently, someone in Karen's circle had framed the story as an aging parent suing his children over property in a moment of mental instability. I gave the reporter a full statement, on the record, factual, calm, with documents to back up every claim, and within a week the article was published, not as a scandal, but as a quietly damning account of elder manipulation and the legal tools available to prevent it. I clipped the article, folded it carefully, and sent it anonymously to Eric's office and Karen's neighborhood association. 3 days later, I received a letter, not from an attorney, not from them, but from my granddaughter Lucy, handwritten. She said she didn't know the full story, only what her parents had told her, but that she hoped I was okay and that she remembered how I used to help her with math on Sunday afternoons. I miss that. I hope we talk again someday. I didn't respond. Not yet. I folded her letter and placed it in the desk drawer where I kept the few things I couldn't throw away. Then came the final move. I updated the trust. I removed Karen and Eric as any potential beneficiaries. I replaced them with a modest scholarship fund to support students pursuing public education careers in Colorado. I named Lucy, and only Lucy, as the sole individual family member to receive anything upon my passing. A modest sum. Enough to be meaningful, but not enough to corrupt. I left a letter with my lawyer to be delivered to her upon my death, explaining why. Not to shame her parents, but to show her that clarity, even late in life, is worth preserving. When Judith told me the buyers for the house were confirmed and the sale would go through within the month, I sat in my living room and looked out at the evening sun casting long shadows over the porch. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on anyone's approval. I wasn't hoping for a call that would never come. I wasn't wondering what I had done wrong as a father. I had done the best I could. I had built a life. And when that life was threatened, I fought for it. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with the steady insistence that I still mattered. And when the money arrived, my third of the property, my share they never thought I'd claim, I transferred it quietly into the trust and scheduled an appointment to tour a cottage by the lake. Not far from here, but far enough that no one would drop by uninvited. I was going to spend the rest of my days exactly as I chose, and no one would ever speak for me again. The house by the lake wasn't grand, but it was mine, in a way the family home had ceased to be long ago. A single-story cottage with cedar siding, a screened-in porch, and a view of the water that changed color with every hour of the day. I signed the papers 2 weeks after the property sale was finalized and moved in quietly, taking with me only what I needed. My books, my records, the desk Miriam had written her letters at, and one box filled with photos. Not all of them happy, but all of them real. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving town. There was no farewell party, no announcement. I left a forwarding address with the post office and nothing else. The silence was intentional. A punctuation mark. A quiet statement that I was no longer available to play the role of the vulnerable elder in their staged family drama. No more unexpected visits. No more suspicious offers of help. No more pretending we could fix what they had deliberately shattered. The days here pass slowly and without friction. I wake with the sun now, not because I have to, but because I want to watch how the lake holds the light in the early hours, how it reflects the sky back without resistance. I cook simple meals, walk the wooded trails near the property, read long chapters without interruption. I've even started journaling again, something I haven't done since Miriam's passing. It began as a way to track my thoughts, to reassure myself that I was still mentally sharp. But now it's become something else. Evidence not for a court, but for myself. Proof that I am still entirely and stubbornly alive. Lucy wrote again. Her first letter had been tentative, uncertain, but the second one carried more clarity. She said she understood now that things weren't what they seemed, that she had begun to question why no one in the family talked openly about what had happened. She asked if she could visit sometime. I haven't answered yet, not because I don't want to see her, but because I need to be sure. She's not her parents, but she was raised by them, shaped by them, and trust isn't something I can offer easily anymore. Still, I kept her letter. Still, I read it twice. I don't know if Eric and Karen ever truly believed I would follow through, if they thought I'd lose steam or break under pressure, or simply fade away like so many elders who are gently erased from their own narratives. They underestimated the fact that I had nothing left to lose, not because I was defeated, but because I had already grieved what we once were. Grief, I've learned, is a kind of armor. Once you've walked through it, you stop fearing the absence of what used to be. I don't fear their silence. I don't fear their judgment. I don't even fear dying alone, not really. I've lived through worse than solitude. I've lived through betrayal. I've lived through the collapse of family myths I spent decades upholding. What's left is honest. What's left is mine. Some days I think about what would have happened if I hadn't updated my will, hadn't fought back, hadn't listened to that quiet voice in the back of my mind telling me that something was wrong. It chills me to think how easily I could have been placed in some facility, visited twice a year, my accounts drained under the guise of management, my memories dismissed as irrelevant stories from a confused old man. That almost became my legacy. Almost. But not quite. Now, my name is clean. My decisions stand. The trust is solid. And the truth, however quietly, has made its way through the cracks. I know people talk. I know some see me as bitter, others as brave. It doesn't matter. I didn't do this for admiration. I did it for dignity. Every evening, I sit by the window and write a few lines in my journal, then place the pen down beside Miriam's picture. I say goodnight to her out loud. It's not madness. It's ritual. A way of anchoring myself in a life that has been weathered but not lost. Let them say what they want. Let them explain it however they need to. I am still here, and no one speaks for me but me.